Shall I get going?
Yeah.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is the second of the 6 lectures on superexploitation and Marx's Capital. And today, this is what I'm going to cover. I'm going to do sort of just a brief review of what we covered last time and make some preliminary points. But the main focus of the talk is just to outline what Marx's theory of surplus value is, what Marini's theory of labour superexploitation is, and put the two together. I mean, that's the hub of the discussion today. And then I've got some other sort of additional points to make towards the end, and then we'll have our discussion. So those of you who followed the last time will know that I had quite a long look at Hegel's logic from the point of view of understanding what influence it had on the structure of Marx's Capital. And in Hegel's logic, there's a repeating pattern of the movement from an initial appearance of an object into its essence, and then back to its appearance, but with a deeper understanding of what that appearance is, which Hegel called actualization. Now, Marx followed a similar pattern in many times in Capital, but imbued with a different philosophical standpoint. And the philosophical standpoint of contradiction is different in Marx than in Hegel, because he has a materialist view of contradiction, which means that for Hegel, contradiction arises within the movement of thought itself. It arises as being moves into essence, whereas for Marx and for most right-thinking people, of course, contradictions actually occur in reality and in some sense are reflected in the movement of thought. This is very important to understand in the way contradictions move in Marx's Capital. So as well as the repeating pattern, which I've already mentioned, there's another movement where Marx very often picks up concepts from a simple unity point of view, if you like, a simple atom really. And then he looks into its particularities and what are its distinctions and definitions within that concept. And then he moves on again to show how these contradictions move towards a general law. And so the term which is used for this type of movement is sublation, which is identifying a contradiction, recognizing that it moves to another and higher level. Now, of course, in Hegel, moving to a higher level means that the contradiction is resolved. In Marx, quite the opposite. Moving to a higher level means we're moving to the level of a systemic contradiction of the capitalist mode of production. The last point that was made, which is quite important for what we come on to towards the end of today, is Marx was really expert in his use of different levels of abstraction. In his exposition, he often shifts the mode of analysis according to the level of abstraction and the perspective from which he's looking at the capitalist mode of production. So, for example, quite obviously, in a sense, he can look at it from the perspective of production or circulation, or in volume 3, the combination of production and circulation. And then within each volume, we have this movement that I've already mentioned, which is from the particular, or the individual case rather, to its particularities, to the general systemic case. Reflecting this the other way around, this is a schematic of the structure of volumes of Capital, and with the cue from Chris Arthur's work, but again, I've slightly inverted it back the right way, I think. The 3 volumes of Capital are themselves a pattern between essence in volume 1, appearance, which is circulation of Capital in volume 2, and then the coming together of production and circulation in volume 3. And I emphasize this because basically the theory is not complete until you get to volume 3 and the actualization of essence in appearance, which for us means the emergence of surplus value as profit. So basically volume 1 is about, the core of volume 1 is about the production and accumulation of surplus value. Volume 2 is about the movement of capital given that it's an expansion from surplus value, and volume 3 is about how those two things come together. We had a very helpful discussion after the last lecture. These are not the only points that were made, but these are some of the ones that I made a note of, and they're all quite valid, I think. So what underlies this argument is that imperialism is not just a matter of distribution. It is a question of a different recognition of the type of relationship between capital and labor, that there's an internal dynamic within capitalism towards imperialist exploitation of labor. Secondly, what about the history, not just, if you like, the logic? I mean, one of the things that Hegel did say in his idealist manner is that the logic includes content. And what Marx does is take that further, much further. So history matters in its own right, but it also matters in terms of the content of concepts. Now, this is a very sort of broad, and it's not a quick answer to this. It's a very extensive discussion, and it's not just for one individual to fill out the content. It's going to be a team effort, but it's a very important point. Another point was raised, which I do have a sort of a longer and more detailed answer to, but again, it's a very interesting and fruitful question, which is, how does this relate to the theory of crisis? Now, in my view, in Capital, there's kind of like the crisis comes in 4 times in the structure of Capital. It comes in right at the beginning. The very form of money and commodities means that there's always a possibility of a breakdown in the exchange between commodities and money. But secondly, Marx returns to this towards the end of volume 2, where the commodities now are clearly capitalist commodities, they're movements of capital. And again, he writes about the possibility inherent in that situation of a breakdown between different departments, between consumer production, between production, the means of production. These things aren't automatically kept in correspondence. The whole thing could break down because of potential disproportion between the two. Now, by the way, as a parenthesis, Harvey fastens on that point, and he overextends it. You really have to go to volume 3 and the falling rate of profit to move from the possibility of crisis in Marx's theory to its necessity for the system to function. So the declining rate of profit section in volume 3, and we'll come to this, by the way, ends with 2 words, hence crisis. But that's not the end of the story, actually, in the volumes of Capital, because the necessity of crisis does not yet quite tell us what the form of the crisis will be. And in actual fact, in the latter parts of volume 3, Marx starts historically based investigations of the form of the capitalist crisis. He looks at crisis in Britain in 1857, in 1866, and later on as well. Finally, oh, the last point. Can I forget this? No, I can't. Hegel was a racist reactionary, so why are we using him at all? Can't we just dispense with him? And the answer is, yeah, but not quite yet. Soon, Hegel will fall. In relation to that, there are important contributions. I had a long list of references, but here are some more to add. And quite helpfully, these are all helpful contributions in understanding Hegel and how it relates to Marx. The latest one by Pavlidis, a Greek comrade, is very good as well. And what he does is he tries to bring into discussion the work of Viktor Vazhulin, who was a philosopher in the Soviet Union, who followed on from the work of Ilyenkov, who we did talk about last time. So these are all helpful sources as well. Okay, on to the content of today. Capital, Volume 1, is the only volume published during Marx's lifetime. It's probably the most important book ever produced, and also probably it's definitely the most important book ever produced in terms of understanding capitalism. Marx's core theoretical achievements were the concept of surplus value. And Marx, this is a letter he wrote to Engels where he reflects on what he thinks is achievement of volume 1. And first is the identification of surplus value as such, regardless of its particular forms. Now, what Marx goes on to say in that letter is when he talks about forms, he's talking about rent and interest and industrial profit. And there is the term forms in the English translation of capital is quite important to know that there are really two different concepts here. One is the outer form of appearance, but also Marx uses form, or is translated as form, where he's talking actually about inner configurations. So surplus value as such has outer forms, rent, profit, and interest, but it also has distinct inner configurations, such as absolute surplus value and relative surplus value, which we'll come on to. Marx also considered that his recognition of the twofold character of labour is a main achievement. And so he starts off with a commodity in volume 1. He starts off with it as a contradictory unity of use value and exchange value. And he identifies that the labour producing this commodity has in turn and correlatory two aspects. It has the concrete labour, such as